Intro to design thinking. But of course, it's Global Awareness Day, and I love universal design for learning. So I'm also going to add some universal design for learning and accessibility connections, and as we think about design thinking. And really becoming popular these days. A lot of people are employing it. I have some resources at the end of my presentation that that I can share with you about specific to education. But it's popular. We're talking about maker spaces at our and STEAM at our playground at ISTE. So I thought that design thinking is a big. That's why we're doing this today. This is me on a good hair day. It's really hot here in Massachusetts today, so I'm working from home, so I've got my window open. But this is the real me. That's the fancy me. But you can follow me on Twitter. You can go to the CAS website. That's where I work. So that's me. So we're all familiar with really bad design because when something is really poorly designed, we know it. So for example, these drawers, these corner drawers over on the left-hand side here, were really poorly designed. Somebody who added those giant handles to the corner drawers wasn't really thinking that, oh, they have to actually open those drawers. Up corner, there's a huge grate right in front of the curb cut that is supposed to allow people in wheelchairs or people with baby carriages or strollers to be able to get up onto the side. That's not so safe, especially if you're walking with a cane. That cane can just get stuck in the grate. Very poor design. But also, so those are really poor designs in stuff. But we also have to think about design in the products that we make. So this is at the bottom of your screen is a Starbucks truck. And the person who designed that Starbucks truck take into account that the door has to be opened. So when the door slides open on that Starbucks truck, it slides the S over to the end of the word. So it actually looks like it's saying Starbucks. That's design, right? You're not taking into account all of the possible user experiences that might happen with your design. So this is universal, right? So instead of adding on extra designs, we actually incorporate accessibility within our designs. So this is a great staircase that actually incorporates a ramp. So there's no separate entrance. There's no separate. Anybody can use the ramp. Anybody who doesn't want to use the stairs, and people who want to use the stairs can use the stairs. It's a great example of physical that is universally designed. And this is universal design for learning, which is a little bit different. In universal design for learning, we take three of the, and this comes from the learning sciences and neuroscience and our co-founder David Rose, who came up with this idea. It's basically 3 different brain networks. So our affective networks are hand, and actually this as your brain, and this is your spinal cord. So this is the front of the brain, this is the back of the brain. The inside your affective networks. That's where the emotion happens. What's interesting is that you have to go through the inside of the brain, the affective networks, to get to the front and the back. So we started putting affect first. And that's really the why of learning. Why do we design for the variability within our affective networks. We design for variability within why we're actually learning what we want our learners to learn. The recognition networks are way at the back of the brain. So that's like where we see things, where we perceive things, where we hear things. All of that stuff is in the back of the brain. And that's why I designed for variability within the recognition network. So we want to design for people who may not be able to see what we are presenting visually. We want to be able to let people understand what we're presenting with something that for people who can't necessarily hear. And then the strategic networks are right at the front of the brain. So that's the how of learning. So how we actually act on and express what we know. And we offer options within that set of guidelines. So we talk about allowing students to, so if the goal of a lesson is to have students understand the causes of the Civil War, let's not compound that goal with having to write an essay, absolutely having to write an essay. They can create a movie, maybe they can create a podcast, maybe they can, have a cartoon, a comic strip that describes the causes of the Civil War. Now, if the goal is for the students to write a 5-paragraph essay, things we can offer options around, like how they compose, what types of things they add to their compositions, so things like that. So that's universal design for learning. But what we often forget, one of the biggest parts of universal design for learning is design. And that's where design thinking comes in. So what is design thinking and how does accessibility fit in? So design thinking process comes from a bunch of different places. It's so that I actually created this graphic from a bunch of different sources, and again, they're at the end. I'll give this to you. One of them is IDEO, which is a really fantastic company, and they do design thinking, human-centered design thinking and research. They have a great resource just for educators on design thinking for it. Fantastic. But the design thinking process basically starts with empathizing. You go into defining your problem. You go into ideating. You go into prototyping and then ideas. And then you start the whole thing over again. So not only is it a process, you actually have to go back and redo it and iterate on your design. So let me go through these 5 different steps. Words might be different than what you're familiar with, but the idea is basically the same. So, and I'll also add some information about how we think about accessibility and universal design. So when we're empathizing, we want to learn about our audiences. And that's when we can add, so when we're thinking about who our audience might be, that's when we can start to think about the variability that we might, and that's when we can start to think about the universal design for learning principles and guidelines. But we can also think about accessibility within that, and that actually includes accessibility. Universal design for learning and accessibility are not sexually 2 parts of the same thing. You can't have universal design for learning without accessibility, in my opinion. So we ask questions, but we ask questions of people who we might be. So we might have some blind users that we bring in if the goal of what we're creating, whether that's a lesson or an application or a makerspace or something within a makerspace, think about that range of variability. So we ask lots of great questions. We listen generously. This is a great phrase that was coined by Dean Jim Ryan from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. In his book, I forget the name of the book. I'll get it to you. But he talks about listening generously. We don't just want to listen for the answers that we're looking for, listen with our whole hearts. We want to listen to how people are responding to our questions. We want to actually listen more than we're talking, especially when we're doing like a focus group or we're talking to our users about something that we're designing. We also want to analyze the barriers. So we try to imagine what kinds of barriers to getting to the goal might my learners or my users have. So we try to map those out. And then we develop personas. So we have I probably wouldn't do more than 3 to 5 per thing that you're designing. Personas with different attributes. Maybe in your personas, when you're developing personas, you have somebody with a disability so that you can really think carefully about how you would design so that that person can participate in this as well. And maybe have more than one. That's even better. But start with one if it's something you're not used to, and then build from there. So that's how we start to empathize with the people that we're designing for. Then we design, and then we define. So we clearly articulate the problem that we want to solve. So when we get together with either, and again, this can be by yourself or it can be with a team. It's much more fun with by yourself. That's okay too. Tell stories. So make up a story about how your users might go through your prototype or your process or your lab. Make up a story about it. Imagine what success is going to look like. Because if we don't have that idea of what success looks like, then our goal gets really lost in the product lesson or the design that we're developing. So we also have to clarify that goal, and imagining success helps us clarify that goal. And then we also have to establish constraints. when we're designing something, whether it's budget, I've only got 10 bucks and I've got to build this thing, whether it's time, I only have 15 minutes and I need to actually do something with that. We have constraints that actually have to do with accessibility. I can't build something that relies solely on color choice, for example, for people who might be. So we establish those constraints. And again, going back to empathizing, analyzing those barriers might help you establish those constraints. The next step is ideating. And I wasn't sure this was actually a word when I first heard it because it sounds kind of weird. But basically, it's the idea of brainstorming potential solutions. Popular word now, so I assume Merriam-Webster will eventually have it in the dictionary. But it is it's basically a solution. So expressing freely. So using yes and, not yes but. So that's one of the strategies that we can use to express freely when we're brainstorming. You don't want to negate ideas. You want those ideas that are coming out of left field. You want those ideas that make you go, I don't know if we can do that. Those are actually the ideas that help you move forward and more innovative. Also, reach for inspiration. Don't just rely on the inspiration that you have and that you've always relied on. Bring in something else. Bring in somebody that has, if you're a teacher subject, bring in somebody from another department and talk through some of your ideas with them. They might have something that they're doing that relates to what you're doing in a very different way. Also, reach for inspiration community. The disability community has come up with some really insanely creative solutions for solving the problems that they encounter every day in their environment. So reach for those and welcome the small. So sometimes we think that maybe an idea is too small to actually do something with, but it's sometimes the smallest thing difference. So for example, when we're thinking about the placement, in my job we build. Sometimes I'm part of building websites and sometimes when we go out to a school, we actually bring two different designs, and we have the student, and they're actually paper designs, and we have the students actually mark what they don't like. And sometimes, actually most of the time, what the students come up with is something better than we originally intended. And that's because they take a small actually created and say, if you put this here, that would be awesome. That would make me click on that button more. That would make me understand what that thing does. Or that just so don't discount the small, welcome it. Also, and then at the end of your brainstorming, make sure that you select promising ideas. So brainstorming is only good enough with that brainstorm. So definitely make the time to select promising ideas. And sometimes when I'm selecting promising ideas, sometimes I select things that are realistic and maybe don't seem that realistic, just to keep those in mind when I'm designing. So that's ideate. And then we prototype. So when I was talking about designs out to students, I was talking about prototypes that we've done. So we build representations of our ideas. And that's really the heart of maker spaces. It's the heart of building anything. We can lessons. And the keys to really good prototypes is jumping right in. Having the courage to jump right in. And you combine ideas. The students who they took one piece of one design and another piece of another design and came up with something completely different. And then sometimes what you have a really solid idea, scrap it and start from scratch and try to recreate it. Because when you scrap it, and I know it takes time, but if you scrap it and start from scratch, you actually can, what you have in your mind, what you remember that design or that design you came up with before, you'll come up with actually the most salient points of that original design, and it will be much simple, and it might just surprise you in how much more simple and concrete it becomes. But then also when we're prototyping, we always have to check back with reality. We have to, will this actually work? Do I actually have the budget to do it? Will it actually include the people that I want it to include? Check back with your personas. Make sure that you're addressing all of the needs that that your users will have, and as good as you can. So it's always good to check back with reality, even though we're trying to come up with innovation. The step of design thinking is really to try your ideas with real people, and engage with diversity. And this is where you can think about those students with disabilities, include them and out with different students. Try them out with different people, adults, anybody. Grab anybody who's in your audience that you want to benefit from your design. Experiment openly. So be really open with people. I'm trying something out. So I'm trying something new today, and I really love your feedback. And the feedback is really the most important thing. We can design the most amazing, A/B study research study that could be published in a journal. But if we don't embrace the feedback that we receive, it's not going to be worth it. We're not going to improve. And then repeat. Keep going, keep doing this again and again. And again. I remember when I was a teacher, I was a co-teacher, I was a special educator, and I co-taught with general education teachers at a high school. We used to do little experiments because we had the same prep 3 times during the day of the same biology 1 class. And we would tweak things just a little bit during each period. I know teachers do this instinctively if you've got the same thing that you have to do every single day. But like we would read of some things, or we would try out something completely different with the same goal in mind, but a different activity with one period than we did with another period. The kids loved it because they tell them ahead of time that we were kind of trying this out to see how it goes. And sometimes we would have the kids come back at lunch from the different periods throughout the day and tell us how it went. What did they like? What did they didn't? What did they? So that's a fun way to experiment and prototype in the classroom. You can even do it digitally. But at the beginning, I talked about design thinking as a process cycle. So once we're done testing, we actually have to go back to our empathizing, and we have to start this whole thing all over again. And we can do little pieces. We could do the test prototype, or we could do the testing and then go back to ideate, or we could in our prototype realize, you know what, we really have to go back to our users and see what they really need. So we might go from prototype to empathize. It's really important to remember that it's a cycle and not just a straight line. Design is a never-ending process. We're never actually done. We're always improving. But that's one of the things that I think is one of the main thinking and thinking about design in universal design for learning. So these are the resources I was talking about. I realize you can't click on these links, but I will to be posted after the fact, and I will, as we're asking questions and into the next presentation, I will put these links in the chat box so you have that. And that's it for me.